40 days. That's all it took to bring the world closer to a third world war than at any point in living memory. And then, almost overnight, someone hit pause. A 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran has halted 40 days of US-Israeli attacks on Iran that had pushed the entire region to the brink of a wider war. If you blinked, you missed how fast this escalated, and how suddenly it stopped. But here's the thing you need to understand before we go any further. This ceasefire is not peace. It is not a treaty. It is not even close to a resolution. It is a 14-day timeout in a conflict that has already redrawn the map of Middle Eastern power. And the clock is already ticking. So let's rewind, because to understand where we are today, you need to understand how we got here. On February 28, 2026, Israel and the United States launched an air war against Iran, killing its supreme leader and many other officials, destroying a large number of military and government targets and killing civilians. Think about that for a second. The supreme leader of Iran, the man who had ruled the Islamic Republic for decades, the ideological cornerstone of the entire regime, was killed on day one. Iran responded in kind. Fierce exchanges of airstrikes, missile attacks, and threats followed, seeing unprecedented strikes on Gulf nations, disrupting global shipping routes and heightening fears of a prolonged confrontation. Oil prices spiked, global markets panicked, insurance companies stopped covering ships in the Persian Gulf. The world held its breath. And then, on April 7th, just as the situation appeared to be lurching toward the point of no return, one country nobody expected stepped into the center of the storm. Pakistan, and somehow, against all odds, got both sides to stand down, at least for now. To really grasp why this ceasefire is so fragile, you have to understand the weeks of failed diplomacy, ultimatums, and near misses that came before it. Because this deal almost didn't happen at all. US President Donald Trump wrote on March 6, 2026 that there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender, words that made any diplomatic off-ramp look impossible. Meanwhile, Iran wasn't backing down either. By March 10th, only 15 ships had made it through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the single most important waterways on the planet, responsible for roughly 20% of the world's oil supply. Iran had effectively weaponized global trade. Then came the proposals. A dizzying back and forth of plans, counterplans, and rejections that reads like a diplomatic thriller. On March 25th, Pakistani officials delivered a 15-point proposal from the US to Iran, detailing a ceasefire plan that included an end to Iran's nuclear program, limits on its missiles, reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, restrictions on Iran's support for armed groups, and sanctions relief for Iran. Iran rejected it flat. An anonymous Iranian official told state media that Iran would end the war on its own terms and its own timeline. Iran then fired back with its own counter-proposal demanding security guarantees, war reparations, and international recognition of its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. On March 31st, Pakistan and China delivered a joint 5-point initiative for peace, calling for an immediate end to all hostilities and allowance of humanitarian aid into the region. That too went nowhere fast. Then, on April 5th, a new ceasefire framework was introduced, and Iran rejected that one too, instead putting forward its own 10-point peace plan. The next proposal was reportedly negotiated between Pakistani Army Staff Chief Asim Munir, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. And on April 7th, the night before the ceasefire was announced, Trump threatened something that made the entire world go cold. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, if Iran did not reach a deal. 24 hours later, a ceasefire was announced. Draw your own conclusions about what that threat was worth, or what it cost. Now here's where it gets complicated, because the terms of this ceasefire are thinner than most people realize, and the cracks were visible within hours of it being announced. The truce, brokered by Pakistan, follows fierce exchanges of strikes and threats, with Iranian confirmation that it will allow the resumption of shipping across the Strait of Hormuz during the 2-week period, a move that immediately eased global markets. Trump hailed the ceasefire early Wednesday as a big day for world peace, and as he pledged the US would help free up the Strait of Hormuz, global investors breathed a sigh of relief. Markets surged and crude oil prices plunged. Great news, right? Except within hours, reports emerged that the strait had been closed again. The White House denied the reports, saying they were false and that there was an uptick in traffic. But Lloyd's List, which tracks maritime intelligence data, said that only 3 ships had transited the waterway since the ceasefire was announced. 3 ships. That's not a reopened strait. That's a closed strait with better PR. And then there's the Lebanon problem, which may be the single biggest threat to this entire agreement unraveling. Israel said it supports the agreement but is continuing its assault on Iranian-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon. Prime Minister Netanyahu said the ceasefire would not extend to Israel's fighting with Hezbollah or its invasion of southern Lebanon, seeming to directly contradict Pakistani PM Sharif's claims that the ceasefire included a halt to Israel's attacks on Lebanon. On the very morning the ceasefire was announced, the Israeli army launched what it called its largest strikes on Beirut since the start of the war. Iran's parliamentary speaker declared that 3 parts of Iran's 10-point ceasefire proposal had already been violated on day 1. The IRGC issued warnings. Hezbollah said it had halted attacks. Then Israel struck again. Analysts warned that the greatest threat to any ceasefire in the region remains Israel, adding that Israel prefers ambiguous ceasefire deals that allow it to continue operations. This is the core tension nobody in official statements wants to say out loud. The US and Iran agreed to stop fighting each other, but Israel, America's closest ally, is still fighting Iran's proxies, which Iran views as a violation of the spirit of the deal, if not the letter of it. So where does this leave us? Is it over? Not even close. The immediate next step is the start of negotiations in Islamabad, where US and Iranian officials are expected to meet under Pakistani mediation, with Pakistani PM Sharif inviting delegations from both countries on April 10, 2026, to further negotiate a conclusive agreement to settle all disputes. That's today, and the stakes of those talks could not be higher, because the two sides are still miles apart on the issues that actually matter. A senior Israeli official, speaking anonymously, said the US has assured Israel it will insist on the removal of enriched uranium from Iran, an end to further enrichment, and the elimination of the ballistic missile threat during negotiations. Meanwhile, Iran expert Trita Parsi noted that the question of uranium enrichment was the very point that caused the collapse of negotiations back in February, and that Iran would want to make sure Trump surrenders this point. In other words, the single issue most likely to blow up any deal is the exact issue both sides are hardest line about. Netanyahu said separately that Iran's highly enriched uranium would be removed from Iran, whether through negotiations or by force, a statement that didn't sound much like a country committed to peaceful resolution, and yet. And this is the part that deserves a moment of honest reflection. Something did shift. Iran's Trump-cited 10-point plan has been treated by the US as a basis for negotiation, signaling potential progress toward long-term peace. Parsi put it plainly, the talks in Islamabad could fail, but the terrain has shifted. Trump's failed use of force has blunted the credibility of American military threats. That is a profound observation. 40 days of strikes didn't produce unconditional surrender. It produced a 2-week pause and a plane ticket to Islamabad. What you're watching right now isn't the end of a war. It's the world's most dangerous negotiation. Conducted under a ticking clock, with a ceasefire already showing cracks, a third party still bombing, and 2 delegations about to sit across from each other in Pakistan with the entire global economy watching every word they say. The question isn't whether it's over. The question is what happens when the 2 weeks run out.